Alright guys, there's a small update coming to Clash Royale tomorrow. A big part of that update is balance changes. I guess they wanted to implement balance changes before the 20 win challenge started, and also the Clash Royale World Finals, which are also happening at the end of this month because they normally don't do balances at this time. So I'm going to give my opinion on the cards that got buffed and nerfed and explained how they'll impact the card, and I'll give the community feedback and opinion on the balance changes as well, and I'll get into the other things that are happening in this small update too, all in today's video. So like I said guys, the main part of the update are the balance changes, and the evolved bats are getting a buff. Their first hit time is getting decreased by 60%, which means they're way more likely to get hits in before they get spelled away, which means they're going to be more likely to heal themselves up. I think that this is 100% deserved because they were by far the worst evolution in the game, and it was kind of underwhelming. No one was really excited to play them because of how weak they are before 0.5 going to 0.2, so this is a pretty significant buff, and they might actually be decent afterwards. Now, the next buff is the Evolved Skeletons. This one surprises me a little bit because I think the Evolved Skeletons, we all know they're a little better than the Evolved Bats, and because the Royal Recruits and the Evolved Knight are getting nerfed, which I'll get to in a second. That's an indirect buff to the Evolved Skeletons anyway because you can only have one evolution in the deck, but they decided they were too weak anyway and decided to buff them, so their first hit time, kind of like the bats, is getting decreased, but instead of it being 60%, it's going to be 20%, and this is going to be a pretty massive buff because all it takes is one of the skeletons to start attacking, and then they all start swarming in, so this is going from 0.5 to 0.4. I feel like after this, they might be low-key kind of broken. And now for the first nerf, we have the Evolved Knight. This is 100% deserved. I think we all know that that first nerf it got a little while ago hardly did anything. It is still completely busted, and many people consider it to be the best evolution. It's getting an 18% hit speed nerf. It's going from 1.11 to 0.909, and the effective DPS minus 18 makes sense because the hit speed is going down 18%. So I feel like this is a well-deserved nerf. Believe it or not, this may not even be enough, and it might still be very strong after this. The Evolved Royal Recruits are getting nerfed, and once again, kind of like the Evolved Knight, I think this is 100% deserved. They're a little weaker than the Evolved Knight, which is why they didn't get as big of a nerf, but keep in mind, because there's 6 recruits, it's a pretty substantial nerf because it's minus 5% damage, but that's for all of them, so it's actually going to be quite impactful. It's going from 1.12 to 1.06, so it might seem small, but it's going to be very noticeable because there's a bunch of them. And you guys might think this is crazy because the Little Prince has only been in the game for about 6-7 days now. They already decided to include him in this emergency balance change because he has been absolutely broken, has had about an 85% usage rate in the top 200. So they decided to nerf the ability, which is the Royal Rescue Dash Distance. So instead of it being 5 tiles, it's going to be 4.5, and guys, believe me, this is hardly going to do anything because the Little Prince is a really, really busted card right now, so even though some people were worried about him getting nerfed because it's so early on and people wanted to wait a bit, don't worry, he's not going anywhere. This is just a small, very small nerf. And as I mentioned, the balance changes were the main part of the update, but there's some other small bug fixes coming. There was some clone bugs going on, which I showed you guys, and then also there was overlapping buildings. If you played 2 buildings on top of each other at the same time, you could play it on top of each other, and then the Guardian was also hitting units underground when it wasn't supposed to, and then the practice mode, the bots were not playing the evolved cards in the replays, and then there's some other things too you could read there. So nothing too crazy. Now let's get into the feedback of what pros and other players in the game think of the balance changes. Alright, so let's look at a pro and a few other people's opinions on the balance changes. He said, Little Prince needs a much bigger nerf. A 3 elixir card with long range shouldn't be able to survive a fireball, and it's doing way too much damage. I agree with him there. I think it's a very small nerf it got, and it's definitely going to need something else down the road, maybe even potentially another emergency nerf later this month. He thinks the Evolved Skelly buff seems good. I guess that's kind of debatable. I think the bats should just instantly spawn with their max hit points so you can never just zap or rage them. That's honestly a decent option. And then he said here, the Night nerf seems good, but it definitely needs a bigger one. I was kind of thinking that too. They need to nerf the hit points or the resistance while walking. Recruit's nerf seem very small. I think the charge damage should get reduced. I disagree there. I think the recruit nerf was more than enough, the 5% damage. And then he thinks the Goblin Giant needed a nerf as well. And then he said the evolved archers, they need their damage reduced. I agree with him there on the evolved archers, but what I think is because the evolved archers are in the past Royale and they just came out and you actually had to spend money to get those, they're going to hold off on nerfing them, and they didn't want to emergency nerf them because then people won't spend as much money on the pass after they got emergency nerf. Whereas the Little Prince, they were willing to emergency nerf it because people were able to get it for free. That's probably their logic. It kind of sucks, but at the same time, it's understandable. Let's see what other people think. Such a good change before the Clash Royale League World Finals. A donkey is better at balancing cards than Supercell. Horrible attempt at a balance on Little Prince. Recruits are also still busted. The Knight change seems decent. Bats will be good if this means you can't zap them reactively. Yep, Julesy made some really good points there. Surprising to see yet another Evolved Skeletons buff, but it'll be interesting for sure. Bats was definitely deserved, and the Little Prince change definitely doesn't seem like it was a big enough nerf. Yeah, a lot of people mentioning the Little Prince not being enough, and I completely agree there. No way Supercell nerfs a card this early. Like I said, it was probably because the Little Prince was free, but also because it was very broken. So I'm glad they identified that and did end up giving it that deserved nerf. Big W. Now next season, Goblin Giant and Graveyard nerf. Recruits deserve a bigger nerf. So there you guys go. Alright guys, now let's see what's going on inside of Reddit. We're still kind of on the topic of balance changes for this post. This guy 4 days ago said all the evolutions are decently good right now. All of them except the evolved bats, which are why the evolved bats are getting buffed tomorrow. I think it's well deserved. But what this guy is suggesting is he's saying, should they survive to 2 elixir spells before they heal? So right when you play them, they already have enough health to survive stuff like Zap and Snowball. How would you make them good? Honestly, I think they could have done that instead of the first attack being decreased by 60%, because, I mean, it still doesn't guarantee that they're going to get that heal, because the Evolved Firecracker survives arrows. The Evolved Barbarian survives Fireball. The Evolved Archer survives arrows. You need 2 elixir spells, and Skeletons are 1 elixir, no even or positive trade possible. But the Bats survives Zap, Snowball, Rage before healing. He's saying that's what they should be able to do because they're 2 elixir, and that would match all the other evolutions as well. So I honestly think this is a brilliant idea. I don't even know if that would make the Evolved Bats too broken, considering that's how the other evolutions are. So what do you guys think of that change? Personally, I think this is a great idea. So we got another balance related post from today. Actually, it was posted. Some guy said, do you think the Little Prince would still be viable if it's changed to 4 elixir? But the ability stays at 3 elixir. You see, it's interesting. There's so many different ways you can nerf the card. Me personally, I think changing the elixir should be the last resort, because that often can kill a card if they're not careful. So I would prefer to see them change the other things about the card, perhaps the damage or the amount of time it takes to increase its shot, or the ability getting nerfed. But let me know how you guys feel. I guess there's many different options they could do for the next nerf it gets.